Pro Tem Treat, you are recognized to present the revisions of Senate Bill 1647.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. Senate Bill 1647.
Pro Tem Treat, request unanimous consent to work from a committee substitute. Without objection, that will be the order. Pro Tem Treat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Is the Oklahoma Empowerment Act. It allows for parents to be in charge of their kids' education, whether that be public, private, homeschool, and it allows for use of expenses for tutoring, for transportation, tuition, other education needs. It requires 10% of those accounts to be audited annually. Mr. Chairman, move do pass and yield for questions.
We have a due pass from the Pro Tem. Will there be questions? Questions of the author. Senator J.J. Dossett for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could the author go through the logistics of this plan, beyond the parents being in charge? How will a voucher be given to a parent, and then how will they be able to use that?
Thank you for that question. It's a savings account housed at the treasurer's office with a varying weight depending on the needs of that individual student. So if I'm sure you're very familiar with the state aid formula dealing with the weights of both grades and individual needs of that child. And so it will be a statewide average of that they can go for. Currently that's at $3,619 base. And then you would kids would apply for that, parents would apply for that on behalf of their kids, and then they'd be able to take those dollars and go where they so choose that best fits the needs of their child.
Senator Dossett, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the eligibility side of things, who will be eligible for this voucher that will be given to the parent?
Every student in the state of Oklahoma.
Senator Dossett, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this include the 40-ish thousand students that are already choosing to not use the public school, that are homeschooling or private schooling? Does that include the people who are already off our formula?
Thank you for that question. As drafted, those people could participate. Very open if it can get you to a yes to empowering parents. To putting some limitations on people who are already availing themselves of that opportunity. As I've gone around and talked to committee members, I haven't had a chance to talk to you. I've asked if that garners support to putting parents in charge of their kids' education, and thus far I've received zero indication that it would move anyone's vote from a no to a yes. And so I'm open to that conversation. Obviously that's a big part of the fiscal price tag if you were to hypothetically assume all 40,000 could avail themselves. That's a farce that could happen, because not every private school would choose to participate within this. But it is a price tag that I'm willing to look at to limit the price. That's not the way it's drafted currently.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for clarification, it's possible that the students that currently are off our formula could come on. What does the author expect the price tag to be in the situation where students who aren't in our formula now will be once these parents are allowed a voucher from the state?
Thank you for the question. I think we need to clarify the use of voucher versus savings account. There's a very clear definition that I'm sure the questioner is aware of. Vouchers say you can use this money only for private schools. When you look at a savings account, you can use it for a multitude of services for that child, including tutoring, transportation. Private school could be part of that, but it also could be homeschooling or other things for curriculum. So I just want to make sure we have I know that it polls really well to say voucher, to get a negative on that, and I'm not suggesting you're doing that, but I have seen the emails. So I want to clarify that, take that opportunity. It's a farce to say all 40,000, but to get to that, you would take 40,000, multiply it by 3,619. It would be a very big number, north of 200 million, but that's not going to happen. And if you're really wanting to help me move this legislation along, I'm more than willing to work with you to get that number down lower.
Additional question, Senator Dawson, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the clarification on terms, so a savings account is more open than a voucher, according to the author. Is that correct? Because a voucher would be directly for school. Savings account, we're opening up to a parent could use these tax dollars for an array of things. Is that fair?
For anything that met their the educational needs, it's defined within the bill what those authorized uses would be, and it's also defined that every one of those accounts, well, 10% of those accounts would be audited annually to make sure that people are being honest and using those dollars as prescribed.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When an audit's done and money's been spent poorly, as we've seen lately with certain entities that have misspent tax dollars on education purposes, what would happen? Would the state reclaim that money? Would charges be filed? Not like's happened right now with this other situation we're in, where the state has $68 million off the grid?
Yes, there would be a clawback provision, and those people would be violating state law. Now, can't force a prosecutor's hand to prosecute, but I would want to make sure that people got prosecuted for violating state law if that were the case.
Additional questions, Senator Joanna Dawson for a question.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, author. You mentioned a clawback. Is that in here?
Yes, there's a portion in here that talks about if somebody leaves, let's say you get into the Oklahoma Empowerment account and then you leave that private school and go back to public school, the money automatically stops, and then there's a clawback. Let me look for it and I'll reference it when I find it when I flip through here. I will get back to you on that.
Follow up.
Shall we wait for that?
If it's the will of the chair, I will continue to other questions and then I will answer that, but I'm open to whatever the chair would like. I'm searching for it as we're talking.
Senator Dawson, as the questioner, you can wait for the response, or we can proceed in another line of questioning. We can come back. It's up to you.
Let's wait.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 7, line 23, the agency closes the account due to intentional misuse as provided for in Section 3 of this Act, or the empowerment student graduates from high school. So that's the part that automatically stops it. And then further down is where we go after the clawback part. But right now, as I'm reading, page 7, line 23 is where I would draw the questioner's attention.
Follow up.
Yes, thank you very much for that indulgence. And so we don't have language in here that deals with, should there ever be a finding of misused funds, we've got a way to stop the funds from being issued, but we have no provisions for handling the misuse of funds in this legislation. Is that right?
Assuming this becomes state law, that would be a violation of state law, which would be empowered to prosecute. But we can look through if you want to stiffen fines, if you want to do something criminal. I'm open to anything that makes the bill better. If you have ideas, I'll welcome them as the process moves forward.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up.
Yes, different line, actually. So we're reading a lot about the agency in this bill. The words the agency appear over and over again. And so we're talking about the Treasury. Is that right?
The Treasurer's Office,
Treasurer's
yes.
Office, pardon. Yes, thank you. All right, I'm looking at page 10.
Senator Dawson for a follow up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Page 10, line 4. We're talking about implementing the provisions of the Oklahoma Empowerment Act here. And so the agency is going to be the one that maintains a list of education service providers. Is that right?
Yes, the agency, as it's referred to in this bill, is defined early on in the Act as the Office of the Treasurer.
Follow up.
Thank you. Who's going to help the Office of the Treasurer determine who the education service providers are? Does the Office of the Treasurer have expertise in that area?
The Office of the Treasurer has expertise in savings accounts and making sure that finances are held to account. Education service provider is defined on page 3, line 16, and eligible student is defined thereafter on line 22.
Additional questions? Sarah Dossett, follow up.
Thank you. I'm looking now at page 3, line 16, defining the education service provider. Can the author help me with the qualifications or the standards that we're going to set in place for what these service providers should be or who they should be? This seems a little loose. Can you help me understand better how we're going to make sure these education service providers are well, folks we want working with our kids?
I apologize to the Senator. I did not hear the last part of that question.
Yes, I'm looking at the definition of education service provider. Can the author help me with the requirements we're putting in place for what an education service provider is? It looks like one of the requirements is simply that they're an organization that receives payments from the Oklahoma Empowerment Account. What's the standard that we're putting in place to make sure that these education service providers are folks that we want working with our kids and receiving our money?
Thank you for that question. I now understand what you're asking about. But if you read the remainder of that sentence after you stopped reading it, receives payments from a parent directing an Oklahoma Empowerment Account. The important part that was left off in the question is to provide educational goods and or services to empowering students. So that's the key part of that sentence. The others, person, business, public school district, public charter school, magnet school, institution within the Oklahoma State Higher Education, or the part you referenced, providing educational goods and or services.
Sarah Dawson, follow up.
Yeah, thank you for the indulgence. This doesn't provide very strict or tight standards for the quality of services that our students might be receiving via public dollars. It's a list of entities, and I'm not sure that we've placed any qualifications on them. An organization that provides educational goods or services. Okay, that's a pretty loose definition. Can the author help me with that?
The ultimate accountability for anything is you moving your dollars away, and so parents will keep these educational institutions more honest than any government intervention could. So I believe that it's the ultimate in accountability that if you are providing a service that meets the needs of that student, the parent will continue to utilize your service. If you are underperforming, not meeting expectations, and or doing something that the parent finds egregious, they can move those dollars elsewhere.
Sarah Dossett, follow up.
So the parent will take the money, and the parent will decide if the money is being used properly, and that will be our system of accountability for these education service providers. Is that correct?
There are some more safeguards within the bill, but the parent is the ultimate safeguard of those dollars. So, yes, I believe the parent will hold the institutions accountable.
Sarah Dossett, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there language in this bill for that? The standards we're holding the parents to, so that the parents can hold these service providers accountable in the use of our money?
There's language in the Oklahoma Constitution that makes it clear that parents are in charge of their kids' education. It's really the only constitution in the United States that really undergirds people's ability to educate their child at home or whatever best fits the needs of that child. So I think it's not only within this statutory language, I think there's sufficient safeguards, but the Constitution of the State of Oklahoma, subsequent AG opinions and court decisions have made it very clear abundantly clear that parents are in charge of their child's educational attainment.
Senator Hicks, before we get to your question, members in the previous line of questioning, I think if you turn to the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7, that may just provide some amplifying data to the questioners. And Senator Hicks, you are recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to go to the Constitution of Oklahoma. Can you define maintain as it's used in Article 13 in the establishment and maintenance of public schools?
I don't. Oh. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question. I don't have the Constitution right in front of me, but you maintain public schools and/or unless other means of education be provided, and that comes from the Constitutional Convention of Oklahoma, where people wanted to safeguard the ability for people to homeschool their children. When you look in the Constitution further, it provides a real baseline. I can't remember the exact amount, but a very minimal amount per pupil spending that state is required to provide for kids, and we've been well above that since. My colleague from Broken Arrow said it's $43, which the senator from Northeast Oklahoma may appreciate more than others in the room. But $43 is the baseline required in the Constitution. Thank you for that.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. $42. And so when we're looking at maintenance, the subsequent line is system. How do we define system as it will be interpreted in this new legislation?
Thank you for that clarification. $42. I was exceeding a dollar. I apologize for that. Like I said, I do not have the constitutional language right in front of me other than the Section 4 of Article 13. The system, it's divided through case law, statute. We're not changing the definition of system. All we're doing is undergirding parents' ability to direct their child's educational attainment.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what does free mean as it's used in the state's constitution? A system of free public schools.
It means shall not cost. And so nothing in this bill takes away from a robust public education system at all.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so in the event that a family chooses to use the empowerment account for a private education, your interpretation is that we are not jeopardizing the meaning or definition of free.
Nothing in my bill changes the definition of free. I'm assuming, not an attorney, but I'm assuming free is well established within case law, and free means free. Nothing changes that. There won't be a tuition to attend your public school or public charter school. So no, we do not change that definition whatsoever.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so in the final line that sets up Article 13, it says, wherein all the children of the state. Do you feel as if the requirements, the entities, the folks that will have access to state tax dollars take all children to be educated?
I think the requirement within the Constitution is that we provide free education for every child that is at their disposal. But obviously, the framers of the Oklahoma Constitution envision the ability for people to go elsewhere. Homeschool mainly was the elsewhere in 1907. It remains a big part of the equation today. If you're referring to the Blaine Amendment language within the Constitution, that's been stricken by the U.S. Supreme Court in a Montana case and another case that I can't recall the state, but where it denied people's ability to go to a parochial school. But I don't think you're referring to that. I think you're just referring to the free part, and nothing within this act, shall it become law, would violate the tenets of the Constitution.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, as we've established, $42 is what's listed. But when we are looking at maintaining a system, who is charged in the state? Who is charged with maintaining a system of free public schools?
We, as the elected officials of the people of the state of Oklahoma, the legislature is charged with that. And we have, at various times in our history, done an excellent job, and various times we've failed at that. Recently, since I've been floor leader and pro tem, we have shown a renewed commitment, and one that we will continue to do as long as I'm in the position I'm in.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so if there is any misuse of the funds, is the legislature to hold those individuals accountable? I'm just trying to understand and reconcile that we are asking parents to ultimately decide with their dollars, but we're not outlining any provisions for misuse or, I mean, I've been in education a really long time, and I can tell you folks that I would absolutely trust with my own money and others that I'd never give a dime to. So how are our parents and the legislature to work hand in hand in making sure that this is successful in the advancement for our children?
Thank you for that question. If you look at page 12, the bottom of page 12 on to 13, it delineates the procedure by which you would hold parents accountable for intentional misuse. The agency, again referring to the department, the treasurer's office, shall establish a fair process to determine intentional or substantial misuse of the Oklahoma Empowerment account. If misuse is determined, then they shall no longer be eligible. Then, if you go on to page 13, the agency shall have the authority to refer suspected cases of intentional or substantial misuse of the OEA, Oklahoma Empowerment account funds, to the Attorney General for investigation if evidence of fraudulent use of funds is obtained. And then it further gives parents the ability to appeal that through the Administrative Procedures Act if they feel like they were wrongly determined to be intentional misuse or abuse of the funds. And then it goes on to subsection K, where the agency, again, the Treasurer's Office, may cease payments to an ESP or educational service provider if the OE accounts are to be determined that they've intentionally misused, substantially misrepresented, routinely failed to provide empowerment students with promised educational goods or services. The agency shall create procedures for a fair process. So all of that in the previous line of questions is very explicitly addressed starting on page through 13.
Additional questions? Senator Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another concern that I have with this language is around abuse and neglect of minors in the state of Oklahoma. Are you aware of what our current rates are surrounding abuse and neglect?
Yeah, it's abysmal. And I've been involved since I got in the legislature through the Pinnacle Plan at DHS. We had an abysmal record as state government overseeing it. When we got sued for kids in foster care, I got involved in that reluctantly. Actually, the previous pro tem assigned it to me really as punishment because I was causing him problems on other areas. And at first I was very upset that I got assigned to that. And then my heart was awoken and torn when I started reading confidential case files, which I still do to this day, Abuse and neglect has no place in Oklahoma. We are way over the national average, and we are making strides. That Justin Brown, the current DHS director, is doing an amazing job of addressing that. We are starting to see some real progress on the Pinnacle plan. The co-neutrals are very engaged. Our rates of domestic abuse in the state are terrible. They're abysmal. We are working in a bipartisan fashion to try to address that, and that happens with kids within the public school system, and counselors are able to intervene at times. That happens with kids that may be in private or homeschool situations, but it's not more prevalent in one or the other. Abuse is something that's a scourge on our society, not just in Oklahoma, and we must address it, and we will address it aggressively. And I have been part of that and want to continue to address abuse at every stage, and we'll partner with anyone, Republican, Democrat, Green Party, whatever, to try to address that issue. No child in Oklahoma, no spouse in Oklahoma should be subject to the things I've seen in some of the confidential case files.
Senator Hicks, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so in the definitions, are the folks that are receiving payments going to be trained, or will they also be held to reporting suspected abuse?
I'll answer your second question first. Every Oklahoman is a mandatory reporter, so absolutely. And so if you are in the classroom, or if you're a plumber, or if you're an electrician, or you're a professor, and you know of or suspect abuse in Oklahoma, you are obligated to report that abuse. So absolutely.
Senator J.J. Dossett for a follow-up. Senator Joanna Dossett, I will get to next. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Previous line of questioning has brought up two questions in my mind. We talked about on page 13, and the mechanism when people do wrong with this, which granted, people are going to do wrong. It happens. But the Attorney General, this will be all gathered, this evidence, and be turned into the Attorney General for investigation. In the current situation, we have $68 million off the grid that was misspent on education expenses. Do you trust the Attorney General to go track down education expenses that are misspent on purpose?
I think the Attorney General has the ultimate accountability standard, just like I seek to have on these dollars. The voters are akin to the parents. So if the voters think the Attorney General is turning a blind eye to abuse, they have a chance at the ballot box to remove that Attorney General or to elect one they think will do so. I believe Attorney General O'Connor, don't know him well, but since I've been around him, I think he's a man of great character and honor, and I think he will do the right thing. I don't know any of his internal decision-making matrix, but absolutely, we as a legislature, if we think something's not being done, we have an obligation to try to spur that along as well. But the ultimate accountability, just like removing OEA accounts from a private school or whatever, would be to remove a person from office if they're not following the law and enforcing the law. And I have the utmost confidence that this current Attorney General will uphold the law of the state of Oklahoma. He's given me no reason to believe he won't.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the author's answer on that, because I agree. I hope that the individuals that are accountable for education money do their job and go make sure that it's spent for the right reasons. And kind of on the same lane, but a different lane, I have some heartburn. Before, on page 3, we're talking about education service provider, and also the clarification, thank you, Mr. Chairman, on page 6. So if we go to page 6 real quick, starting line 21, it's page 6 and then page 7, the Oklahoma Empowerment account only for qualified expenses to provide education for an eligible student, and then the key words here, in at least. So that, I have some heartburn here, because on line 24 it says, in at least the subjects. And we got some curriculum here, reading, English, language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. In the author's opinion, at least means you have to do it in at least these areas. But can these expenses be used in outside areas outside that, per the language I'm reading on page 6?
This is dealing with the application process to be approved as an ESP, and so this is a minimal level of standards. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'm going to go back to your previous question, if the chair will allow. You know better than anyone. I'm a Rogers County kid like yourself. Well, you may be Tulsa County. Well, you wish in your dreams you'd be a Rogers County boy. And I went to Catoosa High School, and shortly after I graduated from Catoosa High School and had one of your soccer coaches as one of my soccer coaches there, that's a Owasso now, there was a finance director at Catoosa that she embezzled money from the school activities fund. And she got prosecuted, and she got sentenced to prison time. And so on your line of questioning about the most recent alleged misuse of state funds in the auditor's report, that's not just with people who are trying to innovate in the educational space and or non-traditional. That has happened in the traditional public school space a lot. I can pull case after case in front of you, but no one sits here and says we should stop traditional public school because a CFO at Catoosa High School misused funds. They're prosecuted. I hope that people get prosecuted if there was misuse of funds on the other. As far as the minimum level of standards on page 6 and 7, again, if there's any chance that I can get you to vote to help me empower parents with choice in their educational attainment, I'd be happy to sit down and work with you if you think these are not stringent enough, or anyone else on this committee or in this chamber.
Senator J.J. Dawson, follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for addressing the issue on page 6, because I don't think they're stringent enough. And the heartburn, if we can go back to page 3, per line of questioning, where we define what an education service provider is. Because the first one and the second one, it says a person or a business. Both of those bother me, because I think of things. I know the author's a big fan of multiple sports and things like that. If I send my kids to pitching lessons, if I send my kids to individual basketball lessons, if I send my kid to dance or piano lessons, this is wide open for any activity, I think, in my opinion, the way I'm reading it, that we all kind of expect to pay for as parents, and we don't expect the state to pay for. So in the author's opinion, when it says an education service provider can be a person, like the person I pay my sons to go learn how to shoot a basketball, I expect to pay that out of pocket. When I read this, though, if I use this voucher, I believe I could be paying state money so my kids can become better shooters, because I'm not good enough to teach them by myself.
You and I can agree on that, even though I haven't ever seen you shoot the basketball. If you read qualified expenses, that's where that is directed head on. You may be a tremendous shooter. I don't mean to impugn the character of your shooting ability. On page 4, line 6, if you look at qualified expenses, it delineates in subsections A, B, C, D, E, tuition at a private school or in the process of attaining accreditation, tuition or fees for non-public online learning, tutoring services contracted for provided for by a public school district, public charter school, or magnet school, including but not limited to classes and extracurricular activities and programs, just the identical to public school district textbooks, curriculum, or other instructional material, and then computer hardware or technological devices, educational software. So it delineates school uniforms, fees for nationally standardized assessments, tuition for summer educational programs or specialized after-school education programs, tuitions fees or assessment fees for a curriculum or program offered by a technology center, educational services and therapies, but not limited to occupational, behavioral, physical, speech, language, and audiology therapies, tuitions or fees for concurrent enrollment at an institution with the Oklahoma State System of Higher Education, fees for transportation to fee-for-service providers for the student to travel to and from an educational service provider, or any other qualified expense approved by the agency, which would go through the APA, and we would have a shot through the JCAR, Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, to make sure those are appropriate and in line with the intent of this legislature.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm an average shooter. The problem is my kids just don't listen to me. They listen to others better than they listen to me. You probably understand the author. So on page 4, back to line 14, tutoring services provided by an individual or a tutoring facility. It's extremely broad. And this is the same kind of problem we ran into, I believe, from what I've read with Epic Youth Services. They were using money for all kinds of things. They were outside. Don't get me wrong. Sports, extracurricular activities are a vital part of a student's learning experience. Sports teach you all, as a former coach, and I understand, I believe the author agrees with me, sports teach you all kinds of things that you can't learn inside a building or inside a classroom necessarily. I'm for the spending of educational money on extracurricular activities, but this is very loose. The subject I was just discussing before, the example I was using, on page 4, line 14, doesn't it say you could tutoring services provided by an individual? That's extreme. Is that not fit into the definition I was using before, where I can just pay someone to tutor my kid in about whatever I decide as the parent is educational activity?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm a below average shooter. I have to come off a screen to be able to actually hit any shot. I can't create my own shot. So maybe I could use your tutoring there. But I think tutoring, again, the parents are going to hold those accountable. The audits that are a new wrinkle to anything like this, where you require a 10% randomized audit of all accounts. People who are misusing these funds intended to help the neediest among us get educational attainment that my kids enjoy at a very good school district, and your kids probably enjoy at a very good school district. We'll hold them accountable through these audits. Again, this is a committee on the bill. It's got to go through several stages to become law. I welcome your input and expertise. I think you and I have always worked well together. If you have ideas to strengthen it, I look forward to that.
Senator Joanna Dawson, thanks for your patience. You are recognized for a question.
I'm always patient with my little brother, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, and thank you to the author for the indulgence. This is going to follow up on Senator Hicks' line of questioning about child abuse and neglect. Would the author believe that our conventional brick and mortar public school districts in the state of Oklahoma and our public school teachers are our state's best line of defense against child abuse and neglect? Would the author believe that?
Yeah, I would have to think that through to see if that's, I think the best line of defense are neighbors, communities, churches, people who have a intimate relationship with that child as far as being around them daily and seeing their progress. And so teachers would absolutely fall within that. But there have been abuses within public schools as well recently. And so they're not immune from abuses within the public school system. But absolutely, I think the vast majority of teachers, counselors, principals, superintendents are a tremendous asset in line of defense on abuse and neglect. But I don't think that absolves the rest of us in the community from playing an active role in making sure that kids and adults are not abused.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you to the author for entertaining more questions. And I know that we talked earlier about all Oklahomans being mandatory reporters, normal everyday folks like electricians and plumbers, for example. You and me, everybody sitting here. But would the author believe that I think that the issue with that is I'm not applying for a scholarship to pay my plumber. I pay for him out of my pocket. He comes and does his job and leaves. And I have got to say that I don't think the mandatory reporting requirements that all Oklahomans have are stringent enough for folks that we are sending our children and our public dollars to provide a really vague definition of educational services. Would the author agree that we need to have some more stringent reporting requirements when it comes to child abuse and neglect for the folks who are providing these services with our public dollars?
As someone who's been deeply engaged in trying to end child abuse, trying to improve foster care and adoption in Oklahoma, I'm open to ideas. I don't really understand exactly how those fit within Senate Bill 1647 and school choice and empowering parents. I'm open to avenues to increase our people who help us make sure that children are not abused. Obviously, many people play a role in that, though. Pediatricians, nurses at the ER, doctors at the ER, teachers, counselors. There's a whole myriad of people. I don't foresee why that's an issue that would be exacerbated with 1647, but I appreciate your line of questioning.
Senator Hicks for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So along the line of record keeping, I know that we are all about having accountability in our public schools and making sure those teachers are teaching and those kids are learning. So what record keeping requirements, if any, are folks who use these vouchers required to keep?
Thank you. I'm having to flip back through the bill. There's requirements that they have to report back to the office on the different levels. Let me find that for you, but it is contained within the bill. Not the same level that you would see. I know that's a common complaint among public educators, the level of report after report, and gladly lock arms with you to try to lessen that burden. But let me find that as I'm flipping through here.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess my question, to just get to the punchline, is, currently with our Homeschool Act in Oklahoma, no records are required to be kept. And so is this going to be a new mandate that if folks who are wanting to have an ESA to pay for homeschool expenses, that they will be required to keep records? And I do realize that co-ops are a totally separate thing, but I'm just speaking broadly as to our current reporting requirements for homeschools.
No, absolutely not. I'm glad you got to the meat of your question. Absolutely not. This does not put new requirements on homeschool parents if they wish to take advantage of any of this. They're obviously not required to take advantage of the Oklahoma empowerment accounts, but no, and it's explicit within this act that not only do we not force the hand of parents who are choosing to educate their kids in a homeschool environment, but we also do not intervene in a private school's affairs as far as how they operate their school. So it's explicitly contained within this bill protections of both the autonomy of private schools and the autonomy of parents to educate their kids in the way they see fit.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I guess my question is why wouldn't we expect some kind of accountability if the state's taxpayers, it's not Carrie Hicks's taxes that are being returned to my family in order to educate my children, but it's a pooling of resources. It's the state taxpayers that will be funding these ESAs, this voucher program for parents to potentially do homeschool for their children. So how do we ensure that those programs that they are either having a contract with as a service provider, or that the curriculum and development that they're doing is aligned to meet state standards? Or is this just a government handout?
I was ready to answer your question until you threw that last little part in there. And you actually slipped and called an ESA for a second. I appreciate that as well. But I believe deeply in the right of parents to be able to educate their kids in the way they see fit, and government interference in the ability to homeschool is a hindrance that is not necessary. If you look at kids who have been homeschooled, obviously not every one of them is a rocket scientist, but I would put up most of the kids that I've seen that have been homeschooled against almost any other group or category of kids in the state, in the nation. We've been privileged as a Senate body to have several homeschool families participate in our PAGE program, and I sit down and visit with those kids every week. Man, I'm impressed with what parents can do. I'm not cut out to do that. I'm very involved in my kids' education, help them with homework, help them with assignments, quiz them in the car continually. But I'm not cut out to be a homeschool parent. But I want to make sure that this state always values homeschool parents, and the government, it's a solution in search of a problem. Homeschool parents, by and large, are doing a huge service to their kids and to society.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so are there any background check requirements for folks that are going to be qualifying to take the government's money? As far as, I mean, currently anyone who's working in a public school has a background check requirement that usually comes out of their own pocket at their own expense. But for folks who are going to be receiving either as a provider through contract services or the individuals themselves, are we ensuring that those background checks are also in place for those individuals?
We're not interfering in the governance of private schools, nor would we be requiring background checks on parents to educate their own kids. But the ultimate safeguard at a private school, again, is that these parents who are paying for a service will demand accountability, and I believe that's sufficient.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so to the previous bill that we just saw and heard, will individuals who potentially contract to provide educational services, will they be covered under the liability insurance?
No.
Senator Joanna Dossett, you win the Dossett sibling rivalry, and you're recognized for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, author, for entertaining more questions. I'm looking at page 8, line 17. Actually, just section G on page 8, and it's talking about the calculation of this entitlement, this payout that each kid's going to get, or each family's going to get. And it says the OSDE is going to calculate an amount equivalent to the total state aid factors that I guess the student would be assigned if they were attending conventional brick and mortar. And so my question is about total. In that calculation, is that going to take local money, like local dollars, that would be applied to a student within their local context? And are they going to take that money with them too to the private school?
No.
Thank you.
Follow up.
Thank you. Can you clarify for us then, what are all those, what's that amount going to look like? What's it going to be comprised of that the kid takes with them?
There's the grade level weight, kindergarten, first, second, that have different weights on those. And then there's special education weights, there's economically disadvantaged weights, there's bilingual weights, gifted and talented, and then you would take a calculation of those individualized needs, and they would be the same as the state aid formula that would be flowing to that district if that kid were in the district.
Follow up.
Thank you. Local money would stay. Is that correct?
Local money would stay within the public school system, yes.
Senator J.J. Dossett, recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the author's indulgence. Feel free to go get water anytime you need, as you've done multiple times. I found some interesting people who are lobbying against this bill. And it happens, there's certain private school organizations and homeschool organizations that are against this bill. And we've heard bills like this the whole time I've been here, on and off for the last 6 years. Then they do have different names, vouchers, savings accounts. I agree. Scholarships, tax credits, things like that. But these groups that I've interacted with, the Constitutional Homeschool Alliance folks, actually, they believe that if you take government money, then you are accountable for the money you take. So there's strings attached. So in your opinion, if a homeschool family takes this money, won't accountability follow in a way that maybe groups are uncomfortable with because they've chosen to be off the grid?
Yeah, thank you for approving my hydration needs. You know, I drink so much coffee, I have to throw water in every once in a while. But yeah, I've seen it. I've read the groups that are opposed to it. In fact, got handed a packet yesterday by a homeschool mom in the hallway and tracked down and read it last night. I disagree with their conclusion, but yeah, there's going to be people who support it. There's going to be people who oppose it. I've also met with public school teachers, believe it or not, that really support this. Met with some administrators. Now, I'm not saying they're the majority of the public school teachers and or administration, but there are anecdotes that I could throw out of people opposed to it. Yeah, that group happens to be opposed to it. I disagree with their conclusion, but those are fears they have. Obviously, whenever government funds something, there's almost always some kind of string attached, so I understand their reticence. I think our Constitution is strong enough. I think case law is strong enough on that. But reasonable minds can disagree, and you can choose to participate or not participate if you're a private school or a homeschool parent. If you wish not to avail yourself of these resources, nothing within this act would force your hand to do so. The argument they lay out in the literature, at least I got, is that somehow you change the marketplace on educational service providers, and then those service providers they're accustomed to using would somehow be adjusted, manipulated by the government. I understand their concern. I don't share their concern.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate you looking through the information the same way I have. I think I do share their concern because back to the constitutional argument, Article 13 says we do have to provide a system of free public education for all students. So that's where the state's going to pay for that system. The other words, unless they find it by other means. So you can go find education by other means. That's freedom. That's Oklahoma. That's America. You can go. That's your choice. But the public school system we maintain with our tax dollars has accountability attached to it. And I do see the creep that could happen. There could be, I'm a homeschool parent. I think that I'm going to get this state money. But accountability has to follow. Don't you agree that accountability has to follow tax dollars?
Yes, and that's the reason 10% of the accounts will be audited to make sure the monies are being used in the prescribed manner of this act. I think that, reasonable minds can disagree. I think that it's tremendous asset, these people who are choosing to homeschool their children. They have expenses such as curriculum, sometimes online. The anecdotal evidence you keep bringing up about the $68 million was a public online charter school. It was not a private institution. It wasn't homeschooling. There are going to be people who try to take advantage of money, regardless how you do it, and we just have to make sure that our laws are adequate to be able to catch those. But you shouldn't hinder the freedom and the empowerment of others that wish to avail themselves of these resources. Our kids are way too precious to be worried about every little potential fraud. We need to catch them. We need to prosecute them. But let's not have it inhibit our ability to make sure that we don't leave a generation behind.
Senator Dossett, JJ, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the author in that answer. So on the account, so beyond specific numbers, specific situations, I fully respect the example that was brought up about a school district in Rogers County years ago, or the current one that's in front of us. But either way, there was an accountability problem. So when we talk about education service providers, so at some point when people take these vouchers and they go to an education service provider, at some point we're going to have to limit what's allowed for that child's education. I mean, what's legit? What's a legit education? That's what we do with our public school system. Wouldn't we have to do that with a voucher system? I mean, we can't just let parents educate their kids or neglect to educate their kids like in the subjects like on page 6 we talked about that has to do with reading, English language arts, math, science, social studies. Those core subjects are pretty universally understood. Students need to know. If a parent takes a voucher and decides they don't want to teach those, then at that point, they're not okay with the tax dollars being spent at that point. I think they have to use it on educating those kids. So then we would be telling parents what they can and can't teach their kids because they have to teach those core subjects. So do you see the accountability that would follow those tax dollars? We would expect them to teach a certain level of things, wouldn't we, with these tax dollars?
So if we were talking about vouchers, we would be saying you can only use this money at a private school. We're talking about savings accounts, or Oklahoma empowerment accounts as I've termed them here, but savings accounts. Much different concept. What you're referring to on that page has to do with the qualifications of education service providers, that they have to be in these arenas. Obviously, we have a minimum level of accountability, or not even a level of accountability. That's minimum is probably the wrong way to phrase it. This legislature, if some hypothetical future legislature wishes to put more restrictions, I can't argue every potential hypothetical, but I can talk about what's in this bill, and it doesn't restrain parents from educating their kids like they do today if they take advantage of this in the homeschool setting. It doesn't restrain any private school who receives this money from educating the kids under their tutelage to the way they see fit. Now, we can talk about some future legislature maybe putting that in, but let's hold those people accountable. We can't fight every fight within this committee right now.
Senator Joanna Dossett, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is along the lines of the senator's questioning. So to our homeschool families, is it fair that you might say to them, don't worry, take advantage of this, there are no strings attached?
Obviously, you're going to have accountability if you misuse those dollars. If you choose to spend it on a vacation to go to the panhandle of Florida and enjoy the beach, there's going to be ramifications to that. So no, I wouldn't phrase it that way. What I would say is take advantage of this to meet the educational needs of your child or children. And if you're doing that, you're well within the confines of this law.
Follow up?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Actually, this is a new line of questioning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is page 10, line 21, referring to the agency, which is the Office of the Treasurer, contracting with private financial management firms or other private organizations to administer the program. Can you walk us through that, author, what that might look like if the Treasury is not doing the work themselves, or if they're contracting it out? Can you help us with that?
Yes and no. I mean, this is common practice within the Treasurer's office. Do I know exactly how it works in every situation? No. But we elect a treasurer, the current treasurer, McDaniel, is very competent in finding vendors to provide services. We don't do it all in-house. We have private contracts with individuals, and those contracts have enforcement mechanisms that if they're not maintaining the minimum level of that contract, they get provisions to either claw back or to terminate those contracts. I imagine that's how it worked, but I can't speak to the specifics of how all that contracting works.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and author. And so that would all just happen within the normal budget of the office?
I'm sorry, I did not hear your question.
That's okay, thank you. That would just happen all within the normal budget of the office. That would be a normal occurrence. There wouldn't be any expenditure that we would need to provide for the legislature. Is that right?
There's a provision within this act that allows them to keep a percentage for the administration of it, and it's a minimal percentage. Like the other questions, I'm going to have to flip through to find that actual percentage, but I'll get it to you.
Thank you.
Senator Hicks, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking on page 8, lines 8 through 10. So I'm confused. If these monies are appropriated to educational purposes, then why are they remitted to the general revenue fund?
I apologize to my colleague. I was distracted reading the answer to the previous question. If the chair will allow, can I address the previous question and then have the gentlelady from Northwest Oklahoma City repeat her question that I accidentally and unintentionally ignored? I apologize.
Pro Tem Treat, you're recognized to answer the previous question. Then, Senator Hicks, if you wouldn't mind repeating this last question. Thank you.
Page 11 lays out, delineates the fee to administer not to exceed 5% for the first 2 years after the effective date of this act and 3% thereafter. And Mr. Chairman, if our colleague could repeat the question, I do apologize.
Senator Hicks, you're recognized for your next question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Which may be a repeat of your previous question.
Okay, thank you. So on page 8, lines 8 through 10, any unused funds remaining in the Oklahoma Empowerment Account at the end of the applicable calendar year shall be remitted to the General Revenue Fund. So can you explain why it's being remitted to the General Revenue Fund when it has been appropriated for educational expenses?
Yes, because this is if somebody takes advantage of that and then they go back to a traditional setting and they forfeit that account would be pulled back into the general fund for us to appropriate as we see fit, because this is when you do the recount in February, that kid would be counted in that traditional public school. But if you see potential issues with it, I'll listen to them and go forward. But this is mainly an intent to make sure that people don't take advantage. They take advantage of the account. They go the first 7 weeks, and then they go enroll in a public school, and then that public school doesn't get the money. We want to make sure that money closely follows the student and is not abused.
Follow up?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So is it fair to say that for mid-year adjustments, that money would be remitted back to General Revenue Fund and then is reallocated through mid-year adjustments, or will it be in the subsequent appropriation for the next year?
It could be either way. It depends on when that kid, if that kid were to, on the hypothetical, re-enroll in public school. It all depends on when they did that. But yes, hypothetically, if they did it before that count, yes, the public school would get it. It wouldn't be set aside in a fund just for that. It would come out of the general revenue into that. But if they enrolled after, we'd have to figure that out.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so to kind of get down into the nuts and bolts of how this allocation will occur, can you explain, are these, when we're talking about state aid, in several of the school districts that I have taught in, many didn't receive much state aid allocation. So if a parent is in an ad valorem heavy school district, are they only receiving what their child would have received from the state aid?
No, it's an average across state aid and weights, so no.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in districts like Pryor, who have a large amount of invested into every student, which is amazing, versus, other districts that have very low. We're averaging the two, and so is there a chance that ultimately individuals who take advantage of this voucher program are receiving more funding than they would had they been in their traditional school?
No, because we're not talking about the per pupil funding that you're referring to that includes the local ad valorem and other sources of revenue. We're talking about the state aid formula, which would be an average across the state. So no, I don't foresee that being an issue.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so for just clarity, are individuals who are contracted as service providers, are they held to the same accountability or standards that our teachers are in public schools?
They're held to a different and an oftentimes higher standard because that parent can withdraw that money at any point along the equation. So I would argue the accountability is there. I know you and I disagree on that, but I think we've gone over that a few times.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, I guess what I was referring to is that I could take this voucher and I could pay an individual to educate my child on the critical race theory. Is that correct?
I'm not going to go down that road. I appreciate the attempt. It's not a voucher. It's a savings account. Very creative way to try to get us off the subject of empowering parents on this deal. That's a fun line of questioning, but I'm not going to participate.
Senator Merrick, you are recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4A, you're talking about accreditation. So accreditation by the State Board of Education or another accrediting association approved by the State Board of Education. Do we have an idea of who those other associations might be, or is that pretty wide open right now?
I don't know all the particulars of that, Senator, but it's a well-established accreditation for within the State Department of Education. That is how we currently determine accreditation. We use this same standard on, for instance, the Lindsay Nicole Henry scholarship. So this is a well-established standard. I can't talk about who's accredited and who's not just off the top of my head.
Follow up. You're recognized.
On page 13, section L, the agency shall create procedures to ensure a fair process. Just curious about the creation of these procedures. I assume they'll be created before there's any participation in the program or anything like that. So will those be, how will they be made public so people can see these procedures?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Treasurer's office is subject to the Administrative Procedures Act, which we amended last year as this body and the body across the rotunda. The governor signed it. So it will go through a rulemaking process, procedures will be defined, and then the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules through the procedures we outlined in statute and joint rules. We'll take a look at that and we'll get to ensure that it met legislative intent and meets our standard of fairness.
Senator Joanna Dawson, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Author. I'm looking at page 11, line 6. This is section F that talks about how the agency, the Treasurer's Office, is going to create a parent-friendly system for payment of services to the education service providers. And I'm just thinking, I just kind of feel like here we are, we collect revenue, legislature appropriates it to the OSDE. OSDE calculates the individual payouts to the kids, sends that over to the treasurer. The treasurer deposits it in an account, and then the Treasury sets up a parent-friendly system of payment of services to the education service providers whom we can't really identify yet, and then they're going to charge us 5% to do that for a couple years and 3%, in perpetuity after that. And it just seems like, are we not growing government here into something that's complicated? Can we just not send the money to the schools?
As you know, we send formula dollars through the State Department of Education. If you wish to decimate the State Department of Education and say they don't serve a role in administering these funds and shrink the size of government, let's go at that. Or let's do an interim study. I'll approve an interim study today if you want to do that, if you don't think we need a body overseeing the administration of funds. But currently we do that through the State Department of Education. If you believe that is a waste of taxpayer money, I'm not familiar with that line of reasoning, but I'll approve today if you submit a study on that we should be giving these monies directly to the school district, and that's a waste of money. Let's look at that. All we're doing is replicating that same safeguard on taxpayer dollars to make sure that the program is administered. We're just transferring those duties since this is a savings account to the Treasurer's office. But if you wish to join me in trying to shrink the size of government, I'm all for it. That fits in my philosophy.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, author. I think what I might have been trying to say is, are we not just moving money around? Just moving it around. Not adding new dollars to the formula. Not investing in our traditional, conventional, brick and mortar public schools, but instead just moving money around, agency to agency, to see if that works better. Is that not what we're doing?
No, we're moving it to the parents. See if they can do it better. And so, yes, we're moving money around, but we're moving money around to the most accountable person in that child's education, and that's the parent. Ultimately, I can't blame government. I can't blame the legislature. I can't blame Congress. I can't blame the President of the United States. I am responsible for the education of my child. This puts the money back and empowers the parents, hence the Oklahoma Empowerment Act, the reason I named it that. But no, it's not just moving money around. It is empowering parents. Moving money is part of that because giving parents control over the money for their children's education is at the essence of this bill. So I would agree there's some movement of money, but there's no increased cost of administering that. Again, I entertain any discussion if you think that something like OSDE or Treasurer is unnecessary and we should be giving those directly. I don't know how you would do that and hold accountability, but I'm open to hearing you out on that.
Additional questions?
Not today. Thank you.
Will there be? Senator Hicks, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so to go back to the accountability question in which parents are charged with moving their money to ensure that their child is getting a quality education, in the current situation that we're experiencing where the state is trying to claw back that $68 million, were the parents or are the parents the ones who are leading the charge to claw back that money to make sure that it's being invested and spent wisely on the children?
I don't know everyone that's involved in it, but I've heard from parents that want to make sure there's accountability there. But I've also heard from parents, to be fair, that say, hey, do not take away the option for us to be able to do an online public charter school because it fit the needs of my kid. If there may be bad actors, and time will tell. The audit definitely looks like there was some nefarious activity going on. But let's let the court system work through, the judicial system. I believe ultimately good will prevail. But yeah, there are parents amongst that crowd calling for, and parents whose kids went through that system, led to a lot of the audit findings because they participated, they put up red flags that there were issues. Again, there hasn't been prosecution yet. I do trust the system will work. And I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, though. We need more competition, not less competition. Competition drives excellence, and if you're not competing for those dollars, there's not the same drive for excellence, in my opinion.
Senator Hicks, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And think that's where our philosophies diverge a little bit, in which I believe that a quality education of a child is a collaborative effort built on the backs of subsequent years, vertical alignment, and horizontal integration. So with this piece of legislation, are we at a point where we have so much money at the state of Oklahoma that we are ready to assume a certain level of waste, fraud, and abuse within this system?
Within the current public education system or the system that I seek to create here?
Pro Tem Tree, recognize your question, Senator Hicks, if you wouldn't mind responding, and then we'll follow up.
Within the voucher program, the auto-filled state savings account?
No, absolutely. Is there waste, fraud, and abuse in state government? Absolutely. Is there waste, fraud, and abuse within the traditional public school system? Absolutely. Are there a lot of good, dedicated public servants who it's actually their calling from God to be a teacher in a public school system? Absolutely. This does nothing to hinder their calling. This just allows more parents to have more choices for their kids. There are some kids, we're blessed in our districts. We have some tremendous public schools. Not everyone in the state enjoys that, and I will not rest until every child in the state of Oklahoma has access to a quality education the same as my kids, that I would expect for my kids. This does not open up any new avenues for the waste, fraud, and abuse. Human nature, we're sinners by nature, and there's going to be people who take advantage of systems, whether they be public systems, whether they be private systems. We're not going to stop that, but we're going to have safeguards in here that make sure people are held to account if they do abuse the taxpayer dollars.
Senator Joanna Dossett for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, author. This is going back to something you stated earlier about competition is what's going to make us better. And so would you say that competition for public dollars is what makes public schools better?
Absolutely. If you look at Medicaid dollars, if we just had public hospitals and there was no competition by the Mercies and Integrises and St. Francis and Hillcrest and the list goes on, mediocrity would prevail. Your sibling, who also serves in the Senate, he and I have gone back and forth, hopefully in a jovial fashion on sports, but that's where I did grow up. That's where I learned competitiveness. That's where I learned to have some self-confidence. I believe deeply in sports, but I also know that I never ran my fastest times in practice when I was running against myself. I never excelled in any sport competing against myself. When there's a monopoly, you don't drive excellence. You don't drive efficiencies. When you have competition, I absolutely, in my heart of hearts, in the core of who I am, believe that public education will get stronger, not weaker, and that is my aim.
Senator Dossett, follow up.
Is it your belief then, thank you, Mr. Chair, is it your belief then that public schools have a monopoly and that mediocrity is prevailing in them, and this is how we're going to fix it?
I think public schools do have a monopoly on the public dollars currently, and I think mediocrity has far too often in the state of Oklahoma been accepted. I think some excel. I think there are some that are tremendous, many actually that are tremendous. But even if one school out of the 520 plus school districts we have is failing our kids, we have an example. You leave the 99 to save the one, and I am trying to make sure that we don't abandon that one, even if we have just one. Now, I think there's more than one school district failing children in Oklahoma. I think the vast majority are doing a good job, but we must have competition. We must have access, quality access to every child in Oklahoma, regardless of where they live, regardless of their race, regardless of their parents' income. We need access to quality education, and unfortunately there are a minority of the students in Oklahoma that don't have that access.
Will there be additional questions? Seeing no additional questions, we have a due pass from Pro Tem Treat. We have a second from the chair. Will there be debate? Senator Newhouse, you're recognized for debate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the author for bringing this measure forward. Many parents in my district and across the state are feeling frustrated at the lack of options available to them to educate their children, especially in the wake of school closings and mask mandates from the COVID pandemic. Many of these parents have been ignored by school administrators and school boards. I feel that parents and not antiquated bureaucratic systems should be empowered to educate their children, which is why I'm supporting Senate Bill 1647.
Senator Merrick, you're recognized for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share the author's philosophy and view that competition increases quality, and I believe it's necessary in our state. I believe in parent empowerment and that parents are the final word on a child's life, including their education. And I have some concerns with this, just to ensure that that is maintained, that there are no strings or encroachment into the public school realm. And I will be voting aye on this. I believe I want to continue the discussion, and I appreciate the author's openness to discuss this and continue to work on this. I think that there is groundwork here for some great possibilities for our state and for families. And so I just look forward to some more dialogue on this and work on this bill to ensure that we create opportunity, but we preserve freedom in the process.
Additional debate. Senator Hicks, you're recognized for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't even get to probably 3/4 of what this piece of legislation aims to do in the state of Oklahoma. We all know that we are lagging in investing properly and appropriately in every child's ability to have the best educational attainment possible. You can look at regional averages. We continue to be at the bottom. Any mechanism that is rating states on its education system that uses funding or investment as a piece in assigning that letter grade has us in the bottom 10. That is not a surprise to most folks in this building. We look at that data consistently, constantly, and we know that it's important. Those dollars that we're investing are important. I agree that parents have an incredible role in the education of their children. But what I'm most concerned about with this particular approach is that the largest expense in our public school investment right now is in teachers. We lead the national average in the shortage of quality, well-trained, and highly professional teachers. What is going to happen when kids who've never been in a public school are now using that investment and those funds for strip mall, pop-up shops that have educational services to render? What is going to happen to Main Street, rural Oklahoma, where the best jobs in the town are in education, where folks have served their community for generations? I'm a second-generation public school teacher, and I'm proud of it. I'm confused as to why this piece of legislation is being presented at such a time as this, when we have passed last year the most historical bill in education. That's what we were told, for parent empowerment and choice, for open transfer. The bill hasn't even gone into effect, doesn't even go into effect until next year, and yet we are already eager to keep chipping away at the foundation of the fabric of our educational services for our kids. And if we can't agree that we need a well-educated society and that the role of government is to ensure accountability to the taxpayers, then I'm not sure that we agree on much. But I will be voting no on this piece of legislation because I don't see the accountability. I do think it's fraught with unintended consequences, and I don't know how we can be honest in answering our constituents, the taxpayers, that we've done our diligence in ensuring that the money is invested wisely.
Senator J.J. Dossey, you're recognized for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the author's endurance today and in this discussion that we've had. I expect y'all to understand your districts better than anyone else in the building. That's why I love our system. I can tell you, Senate District 34 in North Tulsa County, where I've lived my whole life, is overwhelmingly agrees that public money should stay in public schools. So I'm a no.
Will there be additional debate? Senator Dahm, you're recognized for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know there are some concerns from people, and I believe that this bill can be improved, but I appreciate where it is at right now. But there are two things that I want to hit on because much was made of the Oklahoma Constitution during these different lines of questionings, but in those lines of questionings there were several things that were left out, whether intentional or otherwise. For instance, the Oklahoma Constitution does say the legislature shall establish and maintain a system of free public schools, and it does mention wherein all the children of the state. But it goes on in the very last line says, may be educated. Not shall, but may. The legislature has done our job. We have established and we have maintained a free system of public education. But it says they may be educated there. The other provision says the legislature shall provide for the compulsory attendance at some public or other school unless other means of education are provided. So several things have been neglected to be mentioned when it comes to the Constitution. And I believe that this is in conformity with those constitutional provisions and would allow the parents to be able to make those choices of whether they continue to have their child in public school or private school or continue to do homeschooling. So I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of those constitutional provisions in their entirety. Thank you.
Will there be additional debate? I will. Senator Quinn, you're recognized for debate. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be an asset or not, but I am a product of public school, as well as my mother and father, and as well as my kids. And I would tell anyone that the vast majority of my experience as an individual student and as a parent was positive. But I'd also be sticking my head in the sand if I did not realize along the way in different circumstances that had I been the person making the decision, that I would have changed that system for various reasons. We did not have that choice because it has long been the system. Moving forward, whether that was back then or whether it's today, I would tell you that I would strongly suggest that we have a vibrant public education system. Just like we have choices in other areas of the society that we live in. I believe a strong public school system is very attainable. I believe that they will rise to the occasion when we offer competition, just like it happens in other areas of society that we live in. An example of that, for those who have been talked about athletics here today, but the 4-minute barrier was one that could not be attained for years and years and years. But once it was attained, shortly thereafter, all those others kept going past the 4-minute mark. I believe that's the same thing with the public school system. I believe that competition will force them to include parents, include students, and make them, not just include, but make them a priority in the decisions of how they run their school. And when they compete to the satisfaction of those moms and dads and those kids that they have educated, they too will have people that will say, that's where I want my kid to go. And they'll have reasons of wanting that kid to be there. Right now, moms and dads are saying they want a different choice. You can read any media report that you want to, and there's various reasons why. Some people will claim that they have religious reasons. Some people will claim that because that school doesn't have the academic excellence that is required for my kid to excel. My kid has a certain level of special needs. My kid is being bullied. And they don't get swept under the rug. And one of the things that hit me here recently was the fact that it was brought to my attention that 24,000 children in Oklahoma are homeless. 24,000. I think it's extremely important. Senator Treat used the example of the 99 and 1. You can go to any school that you want to, and you can have them pull up the statistics that shows from the time the kid enters the 9th grade till they graduate, there's a certain number of fallouts. I don't know the reason for all those. Sometimes it's because of drugs. Sometimes it's because of parents. Sometimes it's because of the system. Whatever the reason is, we need to have a choice to reduce that number. The emails that you get from time to time use phrases like, public schools will be hurt. That sends a message to me when I read many emails. It talks about the public school being hurt. Why is that same person not putting first that students are being hurt? Because that's what moms and dads are seeing. Moms and dads see that first. The kid should be the priority. The student should be the priority, not the system that has been long in existence. We keep talking about phrases of public funds and public school funds and government money. We can argue on this, but there's no such thing. Government doesn't have one thing that the taxpayers don't give them. Remember that. It's dollars that are collected from the revenues that you create as a citizen of Oklahoma and as a citizen of this great country that we live in. No such thing as public funds or public money or government money. And here's an example. If you don't like where a road is being built, and we'll just use, for example, a bypass because of what it's going to do to your community, the citizens rise up and they change the direction of that bypass, or they may want the bypass. So they go through the processes and they get those government entities that are taking those tax dollars and they put it in the place that they want it to go. Public schools for years and years have done a good job of involving the moms and dads for specific reasons. Whether you're on the PTO or whether you're on the booster club or whether you're out passing bond proposals, they want the parents involved when it comes to supporting financial causes. So why are we not as eager when the moms and dads decide that they want a different system? Because of the student that they are concerned about, because of the kid that they're involved in. We don't want their choice when that's the choice, but we love their choice when they're opening up their checkbooks and their pocketbooks. It's been talked about homeschoolers. Homeschoolers still have a choice. If they don't want to take the dollars in the bill that's being presented, they don't have to. If moms and dads who love the public school system don't want to take those dollars and move those kids, that's fine. But the system that we have now forces moms and dads to take it from one public school system to another public school system that may, in many cases, still have the indoctrination process that so many people are fighting against. Listen to the moms and dads. This is not going away. Whether it passes today or whether it doesn't pass today. This is not any different than big issues that have been fought for years and years in this body. And when the citizens of Oklahoma, when the parents and the students of Oklahoma make up their mind that they want a different choice, it will happen. Today or tomorrow or next year, it's going to happen because it's what the taxpayers of Oklahoma, who have been footing the bill for public education for many, many years. I encourage your support for the bill.
Will there be additional debate? The chair will debate. Members, first off, I just want to thank you all for your patience and for your participation. I know for many this is a significant issue. For those who are visiting us today in this committee or listening online, thank you very much for engaging. I think it makes our government better. I do want to address a couple things which I've received emails about and I've heard said, and I think it's necessary for discussion. We've talked a lot about public dollars for public services. But for some reason, we only limit that discussion to this particular bill. In my now 6th year in this building, I've yet to see anyone file a bill to make sure that University of Tulsa students can't receive Pell Grants. No one's filed a bill to ensure that St. Anthony's Hospital doesn't get Medicaid dollars. I've yet to see a bill filed against the Department of Transportation when they issue an RFP for a private roads and bridges builder to take public tax dollars that we appropriate through the Department of Transportation and let a private company go build a highway project. There are thousands of private contract vendors that the State Department of Education and school districts across the state partner with. There's been not a single piece of legislation, to my knowledge, in this building to prevent that. Tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, flow out of the state coffers every year to private entities. But now we've lumped in parents as a private entity, and really we've singled them out. We've said, but we don't like that private entity. We don't want a parent to receive public dollars. And the mental gymnastics that we have to get to in our brain to make those two things connect just don't make any sense to me. And I think it's important that we call out the hypocrisy. So if anybody wants to file a bill in this committee, I have a couple bills that I'll gladly give you to stop Pell Grants from going to private institutions. We still have 2 weeks of committee after this, and we can have that conversation. The other thing we've talked about is that private schools or other entities that may receive some of these dollars don't have to choose everyone. And probably up until I ran Senate Bill 783 last year, which actually is in law now and is in effect as of 1 January of this year, I probably would have agreed with you. But as I shepherded that bill through the legislative process, I begged public schools to partner with me. But every conversation I had centered around how can we keep kids out? It was never about how can we let kids in. So the truth is, if you cannot afford to live in my district, where the average real estate transaction last year was $417,000, you don't get access to my great public school. So what happens? In 1963, JFK stood on the campus of San Diego State University, and he challenged this nation to solve segregation. We're now 60 years later, and we are more segregated from a public school demographics than we've ever been. We could go around our state and we could point to zip codes and say, because of the poverty or the crime statistics, those schools probably aren't achieving what we think is high educational attainment. Heck, let's use an example that's been all over the news for the past year, Western Heights. We failed those kids, ladies and gentlemen. We failed them. And we can pass a bill this year, but chances are we lost a generation of those kids. It was a public school. And because of arbitrary boundaries we drew, maybe 100 years ago, we said that's where you got to go, unless you can buy a $400,000 home in Edmond. Good luck. Can't even find them if you can afford it. So last night I wrestled with the decision. By the way, I'm not a school choice champion, frankly. I just want to be a champion for kids. And so I did what I think any good legislator would do. I went home and I spoke to my spouse and I prayed. Prayed for all of you. Prayed that I make the right decision. I prayed that my words are used properly to articulate how I feel about this issue. I believe you're all here trying to do what you think is best. There's some things in this bill I don't love. I've articulated that to the pro tem. There's some areas I think we can strengthen, and I think in his 90 minutes of sitting for questions, he's been very receptive to making this piece of legislation better. And I appreciate that. But when I refocus on just, is this a chance to maybe help some of those kids? I think the answer is yes. And it doesn't have to present this unnecessary false dichotomy, which we like to create in this building, right? It's got to be this either or. You're either for great public schools or you're not. I don't believe that. I'm for great public schools. You've seen the legislation I'm running. I'm for paying teachers more. I'm for putting additional dollars into the funding formula. I'm for removing regulations on public schools. I'm for incentivizing more great young men and women into the teacher pipeline. I'm for investing in them when they become teachers and developing them and mentoring them and helping retain them. But make no mistake, despite what's said outside of this committee, you can vote for this bill and still be for all of those things. I think what we're saying right now is, number one, we're for the conversation. And it's been a great conversation. Number two, we're for a parent who maybe is inside of a random school boundary, who doesn't have the ability to move, maybe giving them and their kid an opportunity to get out of a system that just doesn't work for them. It's not an attack on schools. Maybe it just doesn't work for them for any number of reasons. The same reason probably why you don't go to church right across the street. Or why some of you went to a school that wears black and orange instead of a school that wears cream and crimson. Because you had all those options. Or why you'd go to a doctor clear across town and not the one right next door. Because we've empowered your family. And by the way, all those entities are receiving public dollars. But we empowered families to say this may be a better option for you. So I would encourage you to vote yes, at least to continue this conversation. I would encourage you to engage the pro tem, who I found in my 6 years in this building, though he likes to win, and he'll readily admit that, will certainly be open and amenable to working on this piece of legislation as it moves through the process. Mr. Pro Tem, you're recognized to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the recognition, and also thank you for your debate and everyone who debated and asked questions through this process. Since I became pro tem, my wish for this body is that we'd become more deliberative and honor what people think we do. So I appreciate the questions, both those that were aimed at propping my bill up and those that were aimed at cutting my bill down. I appreciate the intellectual curiosity to try to figure it out. And I'm not afraid of changing this bill. What I would say is if you have an earnest desire to improve this bill, I have an absolute open door policy to have that discussion. Any member who wants to have that discussion, you all know that I'm accessible and ready, whether you be a Republican or a Democrat, to have that discussion. These boundary lines of school districts don't take into account what the party registration of the member is when the school is chosen, and so we all have needs in every one of our districts, and I respect each one of you. The comment was made in debate that we're chipping away at the child's education. We're not chipping away at anything. In fact, we're building up. We're adding more options. To chip away would be to take an option away. We are adding an option for parents and for kids. I believe deeply in this. The last year when we were having the conversations on both Opportunity Scholarship Fund and Open Transfer, I said both in press conferences and in closed-door meetings, this is a good start. I think some people thought I was bluffing, but I do not bluff. I believe deeply in every child's future, and I think for the vast majority of Oklahoma kids, their best option is going to be their public school, their local public school, and many are served exceedingly well. But if they're not served exceedingly well, we can't force them to stay in that system. I think it would be wrong of us as policymakers to do so. I have 3 children aged 14, 11, and 10. Their educational needs are as diverse as the needs across this state. Not one of them has the same educational strengths and or weaknesses. They all have unique abilities and unique struggles. And some are well served by systems and some need special attention. Just like it's not unique to my family. It's reflective of every kid across this state. When you talk to parents of their kids, they're either of the same parent or they're raised by the same parents, and their needs could not be more night and day in contrast, and the same is true in my household. My district is blessed. My district has parts of Edmond Public School, Deer Creek Public School, Piedmont Public School, Putnam City Public School, Oklahoma City Public School, a little sliver of Bethany Public Schools, and they stack up pretty well compared to the rest of the state. But not every family can afford or wants to leave their neighborhood or their town, and they need the same options that are afforded to the treat children, because we are able and blessed to be able to live where we live. I think that if you look at our records, our attainment, our rankings, I think they vary depending on who's making them, but none of them are ones that you want to put on a poster board and say, look, we've arrived, we're doing it right. We must continue to innovate. We must continue to drive excellence through competition. And as the chair mentioned, I like to win. I think we're all driven. We wouldn't be in office if we weren't driven to win in some way, shape, or form. But when I was talking to my staff, when I was talking to my spouse, when I was talking to some of my closest friends, there are some issues that I'm willing to even lose on because I think it's the right thing to do. Now, I fully intend on winning this, and if you told me your vote is a yes vote, I still anticipate your vote being a yes vote. But the life issue is so important to me that I'm willing to stand up and even lose. This issue is not equal to it in my mind, but it's really close. Every kid, every family has dignity and worth, and they deserve the best opportunity, and our state is short-selling them if we don't give them more opportunities. This is going to, in my mind, help improve the system we have and give more options, and I strongly encourage your yes vote. I look forward to working with you, assuming this proceeds today. Look forward to any and all productive ideas going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Members, that concludes debate. Clerk will call the roll.
Senator Dahm? Aye. Senator J.A. Dossett?
Nay.
Senator J.J. Dossett? Nay. Senator Duggar? No. Senator Hicks? Nay. Senator Merrick? Aye. Senator Newhouse? Aye. Senator Quinn? Aye. Senator Stanley? Nay. Senator Stevens? Nay. Senator Taylor? Aye. Senator Treat?
Aye.
Senator Pemberton?
Aye.
Senator, Senator McCortney? Aye. Senator Pugh?
Aye.
8 ayes, 7 nays.
Having received 8 ayes and 7 nays, I declare Senate Bill 1647 to have passed.